Last of Us Part 1 is one of my favorite video games of all time. I've always loved watching stories, and no other story in video games has caught my attention like The Last of Us. When Part 2 was announced, I remember exactly where I was when I saw the first trailer. I was at an airport waiting for my flight. I wanted to scream in excitement, but I realized there was several people around me in silence, and I was too embarrassed to make a sound.
What are you doing, kiddo? You really gonna go through with this?
I'm gonna find. And I'm gonna kill. Every last one of them.
We waited 7 long years to see the continuation of Joel and Ellie's story. 7 years passed and the game finally came out. I was so excited and thrilled to play Part 2. I rarely anticipate a video game like this anymore. Unfortunately, I have become jaded with video game releases and I don't get as excited as I used to be when I was a kid. Maybe that's a part of growing up. But Last of Us Part 2 was different. I bought the collector's edition of the game, and I never buy the collector's edition of a game. I'm the type of gamer that usually waits for the games to be free on PlayStation Plus. I never buy at launch. Part 2 came, and as we all know, it has been subject to a lot of controversy. A lot of people hate the game for various reasons. There are several videos online that you can watch on why people hate this game. So my video will not be about that. Instead, this video will be talking about why I think it's possible that The Last of Us Part 2 could be loved in the future. I think it's possible that what happened to The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker could happen to The Last of Us Part 2. The Wind Waker was hated initially at release, but now it's one of the most loved video games of all time. What if this happens to The Last of Us Part 2? First, I want to give you my perspective on this game before I start talking about why I think it could be loved, to show you where I'm coming from. I completed The Last of Us Part 2 a while back, and the reason why I'm just now talking about it is because I wasn't sure how I felt about the game when I completed it a few months ago. The best way I can describe my feelings when I finished the game is like when a girlfriend that I loved and I just had a mutual breakup. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but when I finished the game, that's how I felt. It felt sad. I felt like I went through an incredible adventure full of highs and lows, and in the end, I have nothing. It was sad, fun at times, but disappointing. In the end, I don't regret playing it, and I'm happy I went through it. I'm happy I waited until now to tell you that because I couldn't find the words when I finished the game a few months ago. Like everyone else, I was angry and disappointed when our guy, Joel, was murdered. In the beginning of this video, I said the whole reason why most of us waited 7 years to play Part 2, the reason why we were so excited to play Part 2, was because we wanted to see the continuation of Ellie and Joel's story. Ellie and Joel together. You get rid of one and the whole point of playing Part 2 goes away. That's exactly what happened. And after Joel was murdered and I was walking around the cemetery, I remember thinking that I just don't have any reason to continue playing this game anymore. I persevered and continued playing because I wanted the game to justify itself, to justify killing Joel. Unfortunately, that justification never came, and I felt like I just came off a breakup. I had to tell you my perspective first, before I explained why I think The Last of Us Part 2 could be loved in the future, because that perspective leads right into my argument. Most people that bought Part 2 played Part 1 and also waited a long time. They waited 7 years to play Part 2. That meant that there was a lot of anticipation and high expectations from the gamers, myself included. We wanted to see the continuation of Joel and Ellie. In the future, when new gamers find The Last of Us, they won't have to wait 7 years to play both stories. They won't have those high expectations. They won't have the high anticipation. They will be able to play Part 2 as soon as they finish Part 1. It's possible that these new gamers won't care that Joel was killed off right away. Maybe they will, or maybe they won't. They won't be attached to him like we were for 7 years. The closest thing I can relate this to is the Star Wars prequels. When Episode 1 came out, there was a lot of anticipation and expectations because fans had waited a long time for the Star Wars prequels to come out. When Episode 1 came out, those initial fans were disappointed. But now, after several years have passed, some people grew up on the prequels, are nostalgic about them, and even love them more than the originals. The same could happen to Last of Us Part 2. What if enough time passes, people end up loving The Last of Us Part 2? And what if they could love Part 2 more than Part 1? It sounds ridiculous, but that's kind of what happened to the Star Wars prequels and the Star Wars original trilogy. A good counter argument to this is that I've personally seen and read reviews from people that played Part 2 right after finishing Part 1. They didn't have to wait a long time to play the sequel. From those reviews, they don't think Part 2 is all that great either. That makes my argument meaningless, but I think in the end, it's all subjective on whether you loved Part 2 or not. Another reason Last of Us Part 2 could be loved is the price that people bought it for. When people buy games at lower prices, they expect less from them. For example, I didn't enjoy Uncharted 3 like the other Uncharted games. I still think it's a good game, but if I paid the full $60 for the game, I would have been disappointed. However, that didn't happen. As part of the Uncharted collection, I definitely feel like I got my money's worth after playing the 3 games one after the other. Paying full price for 3 games is obviously better than paying full price for 1. Paying less definitely skews your opinion on how much you love or hate a game. You tend to expect less of the game if you buy it for less. I'm assuming most of us today paid full price for Last of Us Part 2. That's where the hatred and the controversy comes from. Heck, I bought the collector's edition, so I spent more money than most of you, unfortunately. I'm a super cheap gamer, so I'm still butthurt from the purchase. In the future, new gamers won't be paying full price like we did. The game is already discounted for the upcoming holidays. In the future, they could even be playing this game for free if the game comes out on PlayStation Plus. This will skew the opinions of the new gamers that play this game, and they will expect less from The Last of Us Part 2. It's possible that they will wonder why the game was hated so much when it was released. Very similar to how the new generation of the Star Wars prequels wonder why the people from the previous generation hated it so much. The Last of Us Part 3 is for sure being considered. Regardless of what you think of the game, The Last of Us Part 2 still sold well, and it's still a technological masterpiece. The face animations, the music, the graphics, the gameplay, and everything except for maybe the writing has been praised. Currently, The Last of Us Part 2 is now the fastest selling first party PS4 exclusive ever, with more than 4 million copies sold, according to this PlayStation blog. Money talks, and right now the money is saying to release more Last of Us content. This game may be controversial, but that's not going to stop Naughty Dog from releasing more Last of Us content, which will probably include Last of Us Part 3 in the distant future. At this time of writing, Last of Us Part 2 Remastered for PS5 has not been announced yet, but I think it's a no-brainer that it's going to happen. Once it does, I can definitely see development on Part 3 starting after Part 2 Remastered is done. This is very similar to how Part 2's development began after Part 1 Remastered was done. I bring this up because it could be possible that Last of Us Part 3 becomes the game that brings the series back to how Part 1 was critically received. Part 3 can be universally loved, like Part 1. Part 3 could have the story we've all been wanting, and it could even be a prequel with Joel coming back in the story. This is wishful thinking though, because I don't see Naughty Dog doing that at all, but I could see them bringing back Ellie and Abby, whether they think you like her or not. Part 2 felt like Empire Strikes Back or Infinity War, where we feel hopeless and all of our heroes are in a worse spot than what they started in from the beginning, and it leaves a lot of room for a sequel. Part 3 could bring the story full circle and give Ellie the happy ending that we want her to have. These are just my thoughts and ideas laid out, but my point is that if Part 3 releases and it's very good, like very good, like so good that it makes up for everything that Part 2 did, then maybe, just maybe, we won't hate Part 2 as much since Part 3 was excellent. Although I think it's possible that Last of Us Part 2 could be loved, I also think that I could be very wrong. My counter argument is that Part 2 is not as universally appealing as Part 1. Although I think it's possible that Last of Us Part 2 could be loved, I also think that I could be very wrong. My counter argument for this whole video is that Part 2 is not as universally appealing as Part 1, which I think is the reason why Part 1 is as loved as it is. So let me explain what this means. My mom is not a gamer at all. She doesn't play video games, and she doesn't even know how to turn on the PlayStation 4. The only games she has played in her life is Candy Crush and Super Mario 3D Land, but even then, she didn't play those for long. And the only video game character she knows is Mario. I told her about my favorite video game, The Last of Us, and I asked her if she could watch me play. She agreed. We played the whole game together, and by the end, my mom was invested in the story, and she was the one that was asking me to play the game, pushing me to keep moving forward. She wanted me to save Ellie, just like we all did, and she didn't really care for the cure, just like we all did, and she was happy when we saved Ellie at the end, just like we all were. Last of Us Part 1 holds a special place in my heart for that reason. I got to introduce one of my favorite video games of all time to my mom, someone who never plays video games. I have not shown my mom Last of Us Part 2, and I don't plan on doing so. I don't think my mom will like the game at all. Part 1 might have been dark at times, but it was always saved by a heartwarming, developing relationship between Joel and Ellie. Part 2 has a lot of unnecessary gruesome scenes, and it's not saved by anything. You could argue that it's saved by Ellie and Dina's relationship, but their relationship, in my opinion, isn't as interesting as Ellie's and Joel's. This is the reason why I don't think my mom would like The Last of Us Part 2, because of its unnecessary gruesomeness and violence. And my mom doesn't like to see that in her entertainment. I feel like The Last of Us Part 1 has such a large target audience that you could show the game to anyone. People who play games and people who never play games. And regardless of who they are, they will enjoy it. With The Last of Us Part 2, I feel like it has a smaller target audience. And I'm not sure for who exactly it's for, because I know that it's not for me. Last of Us Part 2 is not for the gamers that fell in love with Joel and Ellie's relationship. This lack of universal appeal could stop Last of Us Part 2 from ever being loved in the future. Whether Last of Us Part 2 is loved in the future or not, I am not excited for the series anymore as I was when Part 2 was announced. I think it could be possible that, like The Wind Waker and the Star Wars prequels, this game could be loved by a whole new generation. I think it could be possible that there is a gamer out there that will play this game at a discount or for free on the PlayStation Plus, and despite everything they have heard from me and everyone else, they will play it and they will absolutely love it. Although this series may not be for me anymore, I am happy that it is for someone out there. And you know what? That's good enough for me.